A billion-dollar Russian armored convoy, 120 advanced T-90M tanks leading the charge, hundreds of troops and support vehicles in its spine, was supposed to crush anything in its path. Instead, it was torn apart in under an hour by the cheapest weapons on the battlefield, drones and dirt bikes. This wasn't science fiction, it was a trap, and one that changed how we think about armored warfare today. Before we move on, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Imagine 250 tanks and 400 armored vehicles thundering forward across a flat expanse of land, steel grinding against earth, engines growling in unison, the dust clouds stretching for miles. How could any army stop that without matching steel for steel? On paper, the answer is simple: you couldn't. Ukraine did not have an armored line thick enough, nor enough artillery tubes to outmatch what was bearing down on them. Their choices were slim: confront head-on and be crushed within minutes, or find a way to cut the column apart before it could ever hit its target. The convoy was built around Russia's most modern tanks, the T-90M, more than 100 of them positioned at the spear tip. Behind came infantry fighting vehicles, rows of armored personnel carriers, and the trucks that carried the real fuel of war, diesel for the engines and shells for the guns. Every tracked machine in that formation needed both, and both were strung tightly in the middle, like veins running through a living creature. If supplies moved, the tanks could roll. If they were broken, that mountain of armor turned into dead weight on the road. For Ukrainian troops watching the movement on monitors, the imbalance was brutal. They had small teams scattered around foothills, light reconnaissance vehicles, few pieces of heavy artillery, and limited ammunition. Each of their mortars and cannons was precious. Each tank-killing missile was rationed carefully. To spend them against the front edge of the convoy would solve nothing. It would only invite retaliation from the hundreds of other vehicles stacked behind. The Russians were counting on this logic. The formation they chose was tight, moving like a clenched fist meant to smash through resistance. This style of armored push had long been taught in Russian doctrine. Massed steel, high tempo, maximum pressure. Keep the spacing narrow enough to crush through choke points and force defenders into panic retreats. Their confidence came from history, from the belief that when enough armor pushes together, foes collapse before they even realize where to fire. But the very density that gave strength came with silent risk. There was little room to maneuver inside the formation. Should the road ahead clog, the rear units would stall. If the middle broke, the ends lost their lifeline. That contradiction became the opening the Ukrainians sought. A Ukrainian commander studied the map and drew not defenses to stop the assault, but a narrow box over the terrain itself. He did not intend to meet mass with mass, but to target the seams, to split fuel trucks away from tanks, to scatter the column until those expensive machines were left without support. The kill box was invisible, a digital space marked only on screens before dawn, surrounding bends in the trackless earth where the convoy would least expect ambush. Unaware, Russian crews smoked, drank tea, and tightened their gear, confident no scattered defenders could touch them. The weight of their own machines gave them the sense of invincibility. What they couldn't see was how the field around them was already wired with coordinates and waiting observers, ready to turn that advantage into weakness. The Ukrainian trap did not need to crush the whole fist at once. It only needed to pry open one finger, and the rest would unravel. And so the plan shifted away from heavy duels and into creative tools: cheap drones, improvised mines, and men on dirt bikes ready to strike fast and vanish. What followed would show how a billion-dollar convoy could be undone by weapons that cost less than a family car. How can a swarm of $4,000 drones and riders on dirt bikes bring down a billion-dollar convoy in under an hour? That's the picture Ukraine painted as soon as the Russian column pushed into the digital kill box. The first wave wasn't meant to destroy everything at once. It was meant to splinter the beast. Several dozen fixed-wing drones dived straight into armored personnel carriers at the head of the column, slamming into weak points and lighting turrets on fire. Others plunged into supply trucks between the tank groups, sparks of flame running down the tight formation. Chaos rippled in the convoy, not because every vehicle was destroyed, but because spacing disintegrated. a line designed to move, as one was suddenly broken into jagged pieces. Russian gunners reacted the only way they knew, pouring fire into the sky. Heavy machine guns mounted on armored vehicles raked the air, while tank crews tilted barrels high and fired into incoming shadows. The sound was deafening. Tracer rounds cut glowing lines through morning haze, but precision hits kept landing anyway. A drone nosed into a bridge layer vehicle, blocking mobility. Another crashed into the engine bay of a command truck, stopping transmissions. Slowly, methodically, the front no longer matched the rear. Then came the bizarre twist. Drones weren't only weapons, they were laying traps. Quadcopters hovered low, releasing palm-sized mines onto the dirt roads ahead. Russian drivers thought they were chasing down targets. Instead, when spotting drones hovered nearby, nervous gunners opened fire, triggering their own airbursts directly above their infantry. Shrapnel intended for machines shredded crews instead. In the scramble, tanks backed into supply trucks, igniting extra fires. The tight discipline of the convoy was unraveling in minutes, and it wasn't from major weapons, it was from tiny machines operating 10 feet above the road. But even in clever plans, sudden disaster can strike. Ukraine's main targeting drone, the eye guiding their artillery, was caught in a sweep of Russian fire. It spiraled down, smoke trailing across the sky, leaving commanders blind. Without those eyes, they couldn't update coordinates. For 30 seconds, the entire attack risked collapsing. That's when Sergeant Makala stepped in with nothing more than a commercial quadcopter, the kind usually flown by hobbyists on weekends. He tossed it into the air and linked up with command. The feed returned. It wasn't military grade, it shook in the wind and fuzzed around the edges, but it gave eyes back on the battlefield. Panic turned into direction again. Artillery teams adjusted fire. Mortars landed exactly where stalling vehicles had bunched up. With visual feed restored, Phase 2 began. Mortars rained on choke points, pounding the broken edges of the column. Artillery concentrated on fuel nodes identified by drones, and every hit created rolling explosions that echoed for miles. In that moment, the convoy's greatest weakness was exposed. It couldn't disperse. Units boxed themselves in. Every detonation created mass casualty zones, each slowing the machine behind it. Now, the ground fighters made their move. Motorcycle teams raced toward the flanks, weaving through tree lines and rough earth, then skidding to a halt within only 20 meters of Russian armor. At that distance, rocket-propelled grenades were nearly impossible to miss. Pickups mounted with anti-tank missile launchers rolled forward, operators standing in open beds, sending warheads into immobilized giants. Then, laser-guided artillery rounds landed on the convoy's fuel trucks, the true lifeblood of every tank in the column. Fireballs ripped skyward. Soldiers jumped clear of burning steel. In just 14 minutes, the tanks lost their blood supply, fuel to drive, and shells to fire. Some tried to reverse but stalled where they stood, crews bailing out onto open ground. Hundreds abandoned machines worth millions, too paralyzed to fight, surrounded by smoke and wreckage. Small tools had crippled a giant. By the hour's end, armor was reduced to scrap, and prisoners marched away under guard, proof that improvised tactics and cheap weapons had shattered overwhelming might. The battle proved something larger than one ambush. It showed that modern war doesn't always reward the side with the most armor or the deepest pockets. Speed, adaptability, and intelligence at the edge can decide outcomes faster than raw firepower. A swarm of cheap machines and fast riders rewrote the rules in minutes. Now the question falls to you. Was this a one-time miracle born from desperation, or have we just seen the blueprint for future wars? Let me know your thoughts below. If drones and dirt bikes can erase billion-dollar columns, what battlefield certainties might vanish next?